This couple will go through some serious trouble because of their child. If you enjoy stories like this, leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any new stories. When Nick Callahan proposed to Claire, he never imagined they would end up here. Not because he doubted their love, but because neither of them ever thought about the extent of the trials they would face. They married young, still carried by the dreams they had built together during college in Wilmington. Nick, calculated and organized, built a solid career as a financial consultant. Claire, sweet and determined, left her job in the hospitality industry shortly after they married, dreaming of dedicating herself entirely to motherhood. But life, as always, didn't respect their plans. In their first year of marriage, they received the long-awaited positive pregnancy test, and with it, the overflowing joy only those who dream of a child can understand. They celebrated quietly, whispering plans late at night as if afraid to wake fate. But at 9 weeks, the nightmare arrived without warning. The first miscarriage. The doctor was gentle, saying it was common, that sometimes the body naturally eliminates when something isn't right. They listened, accepted, but their hearts couldn't understand. A few months later, a second positive test reignited their hopes. This time would be different, they told themselves. But it wasn't. Another miscarriage, then came a third, and a fourth. Always before the 10th week, each loss left scars that even time couldn't erase. 2 years passed in this cruel cycle. Physically and emotionally drained, they sought new paths, specialists, endless tests, multiple diagnoses. In the end, few certainties and one fact: Claire's chances of carrying a pregnancy to term were diminishing. That's when they decided to try in vitro fertilization. They used their marriage savings, the down payment fund for a house, and every small reserve they had. When they were told they had 3 viable embryos, it felt like their sacrifice might finally pay off. The first implanted embryo didn't survive. The second failed too. Only one remained. Sitting in front of Dr. Henderson at the fertility clinic in Hartford, the weight of reality hung heavy in the air. "I know what you've been through," the doctor said calmly but firmly, "but I need to be honest. Claire's uterus is extremely compromised. Repeating the process could put her health at serious risk." Claire squeezed Nick's fingers. She didn't want to cry. She had cried enough. "And the embryo?" Nick asked, composed. "It's viable," the doctor answered, "but my recommendation is that you consider surrogacy. It's the safest option for both the baby and Claire." Hard words to hear, a blow to their pride and dream of carrying their own child. But at this point, the desire to hold a living baby in their arms weighed more. After a week of discussions, doubts, and sleepless nights, they made their decision. They contacted the agency recommended by the clinic, discreetly, as these situations require no friends or family involved. "Confidentiality is something we take very seriously," the agency director said at the first meeting. "Privacy protects everyone involved. Only you, the candidate, and the doctors will know the full details." Nick and Claire agreed. Not even their parents knew the specifics. They avoided any comments about previous treatments. They didn't want opinions or judgment. A few weeks later, they got the call. "We've found a candidate that fits your case perfectly. She's young, healthy, has previously carried a pregnancy to term, and has a flawless medical history. If you're interested, we can schedule a meeting." Nick answered without hesitation. "We want to meet her." The following Saturday, they met at a quiet cafe in Ridge Haven, a neighboring town. Claire's nervousness was evident. Nick, as usual, tried to stay composed. Upon entering, they saw the young woman sitting near the window. She stood up politely. When she saw them, "Mr. and Mrs. Callahan, nice to meet you. I'm Shelby Dawson." She had fair skin, red hair tied in a simple bun, and confident green eyes. She was young but carried an unusual sense of calm. "Nice to meet you, Shelby," Nick said, shaking her hand. They sat. After a brief silence, Claire spoke. "Thank you for meeting us. We know this isn't simple." Shelby smiled naturally. "Wasn't an easy decision. I thought a lot about it. I have a 4-year-old daughter, Lily. My pregnancy was smooth and complication-free. I know what this involves, and I'm fully aware of the responsibility." Nick kept a direct tone. "What motivated you to do this?" Shelby took a deep breath. "I'm paying for my nursing school, and my sister is struggling with her child, so part of the money will help her. But first and foremost, I know I can do this responsibly and respectfully." Claire listened carefully, searching her eyes for any sign of dishonesty. But Shelby seemed genuine. "I've reviewed the contract with the agency's attorney," Shelby continued. I have no doubts. I'm comfortable with the terms and the entire medical process. Nick and Claire exchanged glances. This woman would carry their only remaining embryo. Then we're agreed, Nick said firmly. Shelby nodded. Double quotes, as soon as the doctors give the green light, I'll be ready. The following week, Shelby began her hormonal protocol at the Hartford clinic. Exams, adjusted dosages, everything conducted with absolute rigor. Nick and Claire closely followed every step. There was a silent tension, not fear of Shelby, but fear of something going wrong again. One night, as they lay in bed, Claire whispered, "You know what scares me?" "What?" Nick turned to face her. "That everything might go right, and I won't feel like a mother." Nick pulled her close. "This baby is ours, Claire. He always will be." She closed her eyes. She wanted to fully believe that the transfer was scheduled for Monday morning. The fate of their final embryo would be decided then. The fertility center in Hartford felt even more silent that morning. Neither Claire nor Nick had slept well the night before. Shelby was already at the clinic when they arrived, chatting with a nurse, looking surprisingly calm. Claire felt a knot in her stomach at the sight of her. As confident as she was in their decision, having another woman carry her only embryo was a feeling difficult to describe. Shortly after, Dr. Henderson called them in. "Everything is ready. Shelby is responding well to the medication. The embryo is healthy. Now, we'll proceed with the transfer." Shelby gave a soft smile as she passed them. "It's going to be okay," she said, with surprising calm. The procedure lasted less than an hour. When the doctor returned, the couple barely blinked. The transfer was successful. Now, we wait. The next 10 days would be filled with waiting, monitoring, and of course, anxiety. Medical updates came daily. Shelby reported feeling fine, no nausea or pain. Claire read each message with relief, though fear was always nearby. On the 11th day, the phone rang early. Nick answered with Claire at his side. "Mr. Callahan," Dr. Henderson said calmly. "The tests confirmed it. The pregnancy has been established. The embryo implanted successfully." Claire burst into tears instantly. Nick closed his eyes in relief. It was just the beginning, but finally, a promising start. The following weeks felt like a dream. The exams were perfect. Shelby followed all the recommended routines, and the baby developed well. With every ultrasound, Claire and Nick saw the little life growing. Though the contract required some distance, they naturally formed a respectful relationship with Shelby. She remained professional, no strange behavior, no forced intimacy. One afternoon, after an appointment, as they were leaving the clinic, Shelby said, "I know this process is delicate for you both. I just want you to know I'm doing this wholeheartedly." Claire smiled sincerely. "We know, and we're more grateful than you can imagine." At 5 months, the doctor confirmed everything was progressing as expected. The baby was growing strong and healthy. Nick finally allowed himself to make practical plans. He met with contractors to remodel the nursery, made spreadsheets of future expenses, and even secretly bought the first outfit to surprise Claire later for the first time in years. There was peace, but as they had learned, peace is fragile. Despite the apparent calm, the emotional toll was beginning to weigh on Claire too. One night, lying beside Nick, she opened up. "I can't help it, Nick. Sometimes I catch myself wondering if I'll really feel like a mother." Nick turned toward her, stroking her hair. "Claire, it doesn't matter who's carrying him. This is our baby, our child. He exists because we created him." She took a deep breath, letting quiet tears fall. I know, but it feels so, strange, like I'm watching everything happen from the outside." Nick hugged her tightly. "You're going to be an amazing mother. When he's born, all of this will fade." Claire smiled, but the lump in her throat remained. Meanwhile, Shelby was also starting to feel the psychological weight of keeping everything under control. The contract protected her legally, payments were on schedule, and the pregnancy was progressing, but the long, lonely nights were getting harder, and her mind increasingly restless. Lily, her 4-year-old daughter, was the only thing keeping her grounded. The little girl didn't fully understand what was happening but sensed something was different. "Mummy, is the baby going to be my brother?" she asked one day. Shelby's heart tightened. "No, sweetheart. This baby will go to another family, but Mummy will always be here for you." Lily nodded, still a bit confused, and returned to her colorful toys on the rug. Shelby watched her, feeling a silent guilt growing inside. Then, on a rainy night, the past she had tried so hard to bury returned to her doorstep. While paying her bill at a small restaurant near her home, she heard a familiar voice behind her, "Shelby." Her body stiffened before she even turned around. It was Blake, her ex-boyfriend, Lily's father. The past she'd worked so hard to escape for years. He had disappeared when he learned of the pregnancy and never claimed responsibility. Now suddenly, there he was. "What are you doing here?" she asked sharply. "That's my question. You vanished for years, and now you single quotes re ... pregnant again," he said with a crooked grin. She tried to walk away, but he lightly grabbed her arm. "Let go, Blake. Relax. Shelby, no need for that. I just found it ... Curious. Who's the father? Someone with money, isn't it?" he teased, eyeing her barely noticeable belly. Shelby stayed calm. "It's none of your business." "Shelby, I'm not stupid. If I want, I can go to the agency, to the clinic. I bet that couple would love to know you have someone from your past causing trouble. Or maybe, I'll show up during one of your appointments." Shelby's throat went dry. "Please, don't do this." Blake took a step closer. "Let's make it easy. Give me $20,000. That's all. Get the rest of your contract money, and I'll disappear. Promise." "I don't have that money, Blake. It's all locked into the contract. I receive payments through the agency." "Then, figure it out. Shelby, you got yourself into this. Fix it." He walked away like he had all the time in the world. Shelby slammed the door shut behind her, breathing heavily. Her legs nearly gave out. She knew she was entering dangerous territory. The days following Shelby's encounter with Blake were suffocating. She tried to keep up with her usual routine of doctor visits and rest, but inside, she was constantly on edge. What tormented her most wasn't Blake's threats, but his unpredictability. Blake had always been unstable. When he disappeared after Lily was born, Shelby thought she'd never have to face that shadow again. But now, everything she had built was at risk of falling apart. And worst of all, if he caused trouble, she wouldn't be the only one suffering the consequences. There was a baby involved. Nick and Claire's baby. The clinic visits continued, as scheduled. The medical reports were flawless. The baby was healthy. Shelby showed all the right signs, and technically, the contract was progressing perfectly. But Claire increasingly noticed Shelby's discomfort. It wasn't physical, it was in her eyes. In the nervous way she fidgeted with her fingers while waiting for appointments, in her forced smiles. One morning, after an ultrasound, while Nick went to the restroom, Claire took a chance. "Shelby, can I ask you something?" "Of course," Shelby replied with her usual polite smile. "I've noticed you seem a bit more anxious lately. I'm not saying it's something serious, but if anything's going on, even personal, maybe we can help." Shelby paused for a few seconds, took a deep breath, and answered in a calm but careful tone, "Thank you for your concern, Claire. It's just exhaustion. My daughter's been more restless at night, and I haven't been sleeping well. It has nothing to do with the pregnancy. I'm okay." Claire slowly nodded, but deep down her alarm bells were ringing. In the car on the way home, Claire brought it up to Nick. "She's hiding something. I can feel it, Claire." Nick replied with his usual composure. "She's dealing with a lot. Besides the pregnancy, she's raising her daughter, dealing with her own family. The important thing is that the baby's okay." Claire stared out the window, uncomfortable. "I just don't want to be blindsided," Nick sighed, gripping the steering wheel tighter. "The agency monitors everything. If there was something serious, they would have told us." But Claire couldn't shake the feeling. That same afternoon, as Shelby left the clinic, she found Blake waiting for her, casually leaning against her car. Her blood ran cold. "What are you doing here?" she asked in a low, sharp voice. "Came to talk." "Shelby, you've been ignoring my messages." "Blake, I told you I don't have the money. I won't risk losing the contract, and I won't jeopardize this pregnancy." He leaned in closer, with that irritating half-smile. "You act like you're some saint, but I know how this works. You're making good money off this deal. This," he subtly pointed to her belly, "isn't just charity." "You don't understand anything," Shelby whispered nervously, glancing around to make sure no one was nearby. "I understand you don't want a scandal," he continued. "Imagine if that couple finds out you've got an ex lurking around, but you're involved with someone who could blow everything up." He took a step back, still threatening. "Shelby, I don't want trouble, I just want what's fair. 20,000 and I disappear for good." She clenched her teeth. "I don't have it. I can't." "Then find a way. Or maybe I'll show up at your next appointment, have a little chat with that perfect couple." Without waiting for a response, he walked off. Disappearing around the corner, Shelby stood frozen for several seconds, her heart racing. The weight of the blackmail was crushing her more each day. In the following days, Shelby's anxiety started affecting even her sleep. She'd wake up several times a night, startled by any little noise. Lily noticed. "Mummy, are you scared?" the little girl asked one night. "No, sweetheart," Shelby answered, forcing a smile. It's just the baby moving. Everything's fine, but everything wasn't fine. Meanwhile, at the Callahan house, Claire and Nick had begun setting up the baby's room. The walls were freshly painted light blue. The crib was assembled and furniture deliveries were arriving. I just can't relax, Claire admitted, sitting on the edge of the crib. Claire, we've talked about this, Nick said, approaching her. We've been through so much. We need to allow ourselves to enjoy this moment. She shook her head silently. I can't, Nick. I feel like something is still out there. Something we don't know yet. Nick hugged her. We'll face everything together like we always have. The next day, the agency scheduled a routine contract review meeting with Shelby, but this time, in addition to the clinic and agency reps, Nick and Claire's attorneys were present. The goal was to create a clear plan in case Blake escalated legally or attempted direct contact. Shelby arrived visibly shaken. I'm sorry for dragging you all into this, she said, nearly in tears. Nick's attorney spoke gently but firmly. Shelby, you didn't create this situation. He's the one breaking the law, and will protect you fully, but we need your complete cooperation. She nodded. He's still texting almost daily, she admitted. Now he's threatening to go to the press and expose the contract. The room fell silent for a few seconds. Claire, heart racing, asked, does he have any actual evidence? No. Only what he saw when he ran into me at the restaurant. He figured out what was happening, but he doesn't have documents or access to the contract. The lawyer sighed. That makes it harder for him to pursue any legal claim, but it doesn't stop him from stirring up scandal through the media. The agency coordinator added, we're tightening security on all information. The press can only publish if something leaks. Nick clenched his jaw. How long until he gives up? The lawyer was honest. Blackmailers like him only give up when they lose leverage, or when they realize they won't get paid. Claire bit her lip. What if he goes after Shelby's family? Shelby swallowed hard. That thought terrified her. I've told my sister not to answer any unknown calls, she said. But I'm scared. Very scared he'll involve my daughter. Her voice cracked, tears welling up. Claire reached across the table, placing her hand on Shelby's. We'll protect you both. The agency's psychological team increased Shelby's counseling sessions 2 weekly. They monitored not just the baby's development but also Shelby's mental state. The obstetrician confirmed everyone's worst fear. The baby remains healthy, but Shelby's stress level is dangerously high. We need to stabilize her emotionally or this could affect the delivery. Claire began calling every day. Not as a client, but as emotional support. If you need anything, Shelby, even just to vent, call me. Thank you, Claire. You don't know how much that means. Meanwhile, Blake was playing the clock. He knew time was on his side. Each passing day brought more tension. Every unanswered message led to another, more sinister one. Imagine if the baby's born and this story comes out. The scandal it'll be. There's still time to settle quietly. When I go public, you won't be able to stop what happens next. One rainy afternoon, as Shelby returned from the clinic, she found Blake's car parked at the corner of her street. He got out slowly, making sure she saw him. Time's running out, Shelby, he said with a smug smile. You know you can't ignore me forever. I've said everything I have to say, she replied tensely, keeping her distance. 20 grand, Shelby, that's all I want, and I vanish. I don't have that money. He leaned in close, whispering, but the couple does. They've got way more than that. It's nothing for people who are paying you to carry their baby. Shelby swallowed hard. I won't drag them into this. You already have, Shelby. They just don't know it yet, he whispered before turning and walking away. Shelby stood frozen, trembling, her entire body cold. In the following days, the doctors became increasingly concerned. Her blood pressure is up, the obstetrician reported. We're not at a critical level yet, but we're close. She needs emotional stability immediately. Nick and Claire listened to the diagnosis, hearts heavy. If this worsens, is there a risk for the baby? Nick asked. There's a risk of premature labor, yes. Claire gripped her husband's hand, her voice trembling. We can't lose this baby, Nick, not after everything. Nick shut his eyes, struggling not to break. We'll act now, he said firmly. This man is going to stop. That night, as Claire finally drifted off to sleep, Nick lay awake, staring at the ceiling. His mind raced, weighing a risky decision. If the legal system couldn't stop him, maybe it was time to seek another solution. Something outside the contracts, outside the agency, outside the rules, but still within the only thing that mattered, saving the baby. The end of the second trimester came with a mix of relief and silent tension. The baby was healthy, Shelby was physically stable, but the psychological pressure kept mounting. Blake continued hovering like a dark cloud on the horizon, always at a distance, always ready to strike whenever he wanted. Lately, his messages had become even more frequent, not directly threatening, but filled with disturbing insinuations. What if your secret stops being a secret? Enjoy the calm while you can. Someone always pays the price. Shelby. Each notification made her heart leap. She tried to ignore them, delete the messages, focus on the pregnancy, her daughter, the contract, but fear was taking over. She knew that if Blake decided to expose everything, the contract might not be legally broken, but the stress could endanger the baby. And that terrified her more than any lawsuit. Claire wasn't at ease either. During recent exams, she noticed Shelby was more agitated, her smiles increasingly forced. Shelby always replied with the same attempt to reassure, "Just tired, Claire, everything's fine." But Claire no longer believed that. There was something else, something Shelby didn't want to reveal. "Nick, I feel like she's being pressured," she vented one night. Nick tried to stay objective. "If there's really a problem, the agency will handle it. We can't build theories on feelings." Claire sighed, frustrated. "I just hope we don't find out too late." One Friday morning, Claire and Nick had a routine meeting at the agency with coordinator Mrs. Miller. They were reviewing documents, payments, and medical updates. In the middle of the meeting, Mrs. Miller's phone rang. She answered discreetly, but her expression subtly shifted. "Excuse me," she said, pausing the meeting. "I need to take this." After hanging up, she took a deep breath and faced the couple. "There's something I need to share with you." Claire's stomach turned. "We were contacted today by an attorney." Nick frowned. "An attorney? From whom? He claims to represent a party with legitimate interests regarding the pregnancy." Claire froze. "That doesn't make any sense." According to the attorney, Shelby's ex-boyfriend is claiming legal paternity of her biological daughter and is trying to challenge her ability to fulfill the surrogacy contract, alleging personal and financial instability. The room fell into heavy silence. Claire kept her hands firmly on her lap, but her heart was racing. Nick tried to piece it together, but the contract is clear. "This man has no relation to the baby." "Exactly," Mrs. Miller confirmed. "Legally, the contract remains solid, but this move is a tactic to cause psychological wear and force a private settlement." Claire swallowed hard. "In other words, blackmail. Veiled blackmail." The coordinator agreed. "How did he even learn about the contract?" Nick asked, irritated. "We don't know exactly, but he seems to know enough to try to pressure Shelby." Claire felt chills run through her. It was exactly what she feared from the start, an unpredictable external factor. Meanwhile, at home, Shelby could no longer hide her emotional breakdown. Lily noticed her mother's growing distress. "Mummy, are you sad?" "No, sweetheart. Just tired," she answered, forcing a smile. That night, Shelby barely slept. Blake's messages wouldn't stop. He knew he was gaining psychological ground. "If you don't fix this soon, I might just show up at their office." "I don't want to, Shelby, but you're forcing me. In the end, I won't be the one who loses." She had no answers, left, and worse, no one to turn to. The next day, the agency called. "We need to talk, Shelby. Urgent." Her heart dropped. She knew what was coming. At the meeting, Claire and Nick were present. The atmosphere was tense from the beginning. Mrs. Miller opened the discussion. "Shelby, we received notice from Blake's attorney. Now we need to be completely honest." Shelby remained silent, visibly ashamed. "I tried to protect you. I didn't want to involve the baby, or risk losing everything." Claire took a deep breath. There was anger, but also empathy. "Shelby, we needed to know from the very first moment. You're not alone in this. I thought he would disappear, like he always did before." Nick cut in firmly. "Now he's involved an attorney, and the emotional strain is jeopardizing this." "Pregnancy, no," Shelby said, her voice cracking. "I'm terrified he doesn't want the baby. He just wants money." The coordinator explained. "The contract remains legally strong, but he wants to create chaos, force enough stress that someone will pay just to make him go away." Claire looked at Shelby, firm. "Shelby, from now on, nothing can be hidden anymore. Any move he makes, any message, you tell us immediately." Tears streamed down Shelby's face as she simply nodded. Outside the agency, parked inside a rented car, Blake watched discreetly. He smiled. For him, the game was just beginning. The tension following the meeting at the agency didn't fade with time. On the contrary, it seemed to grow heavier with each passing day. Shelby felt the pressure doubling. On one side, the delicate pregnancy of a baby that wasn't hers. On The other, Blake's psychological siege, now openly playing with everyone's patience and nerves. Nick and Claire kept up appearances, but their private conversations had shifted in tone. Once they talked about crib colors, baby names, and nursery decor. Now they were discussing legal strategies and security measures. "I spoke with our lawyer today," Nick said one evening, reviewing documents at the dining table. Claire, across from him, barely touched her plate. "And what did he say?" "Technically, we're protected. The contract is airtight, but we can't stop Blake from continuing to file nuisance claims to cause disruption." Claire leaned back in her chair, frustrated. "This man doesn't want justice. He wants money, and he'll keep squeezing until someone gives in." Nick sighed. "That's why we need to stay calm. We can't give him what he wants." Claire stared at her husband. "But what about Shelby? She's stuck in the middle of this, and the baby feels everything she feels. This stress is already affecting the pregnancy." Nick closed his eyes, exhausted. "I know. What terrifies me, the following week, the agency scheduled another meeting with Shelby, this time, alongside the clinic's team and the Callahans, legal representatives. The goal was to establish a clear protocol, how to respond if Blake escalated legally or attempted direct contact. Shelby arrived visibly shaken. "I'm sorry for dragging you all into this," she said, on the verge of tears. Nick's lawyer was direct, but respectful. "Shelby, you didn't cause this. He's the one acting illegally. We'll protect you fully, but for that, we need your complete cooperation." She nodded. "He's still texting almost daily," she admitted, "and now he's threatening to go to the press and expose the contract." Everyone in the room went silent for a few seconds. Claire, heart pounding, asked, "Does he have any proof?" "No, only what he saw at the restaurant," he guessed. "What was happening, but he doesn't have documents or access to the contract." The lawyer took a deep breath. "That makes any legal claim difficult for him, but it doesn't stop him from feeding stories to the press if someone's willing to publish." The agency coordinator added, "We'll tighten confidentiality even further. The media can only work with leaked information." Nick clenched his jaw. "And how long until he gives up?" The lawyer was blunt. "Extortionists like him only stop when they lose their leverage or when they realize they won't get paid." Claire bit her lip. "What if he goes after Shelby's family?" Shelby swallowed hard. That thought terrified her. "I've already told my sister not to answer unknown numbers," she said. "But I'm scared. Very scared he might involve my daughter." Her voice trembled as tears welled up. Claire reached across the table, gently taking Shelby's hand. "We'll protect you." In the days that followed, the agency intensified Shelby's psychological counseling. Sessions became weekly, monitoring not only the baby's development but Shelby's mental state as well. The obstetrician confirmed what everyone feared: the baby is still healthy, but Shelby's stress level is dangerously high. "We need to stabilize her emotionally, or this could compromise the birth." Claire started calling every day, not as a client, but as emotional support. "If you need anything, Shelby, even just to vent, call me." "Thank you, Claire. You have no idea how much that helps." Meanwhile, Blake played with time. He knew the longer this dragged on, the more tension he created. Each unanswered message was followed by another, more aggressive one. "Imagine if this story breaks after the baby's born. The scandal it would be. There's still time to solve this quietly. Once I go public, you won't be able to stop what comes next." One rainy afternoon, as Shelby returned from the clinic, she saw Blake's car parked on her street corner again. He stepped out slowly, ensuring she saw him. "Time's running out, Shelby," he said with his usual smug smile. "You know you can't ignore me forever." "I've told you everything," she said, tense, keeping her distance. 20 grand, Shelby, that's all I want, and I disappear. I don't have that money." He leaned in close, whispering, "But the couple does. They've got much more than that. It's nothing for people paying you to carry their baby." Shelby swallowed hard. "I won't drag them into this. You already have, Shelby. They just don't know it yet," he whispered before walking away again. Shelby stood there, trembling, her entire body frozen. In the following days, the medical team grew increasingly concerned. "Her blood pressure is elevated," the obstetrician informed. "We're not at a critical level yet, but we're getting close. She urgently needs emotional stability." Nick and Claire listened to the diagnosis with sinking hearts. "If this worsens, is there a risk for the baby?" Nick asked. "Yes, there's a risk of premature labor." Claire gripped Nick's hand tightly, her voice shaking. "We can't lose this baby, Nick, not after everything." Nick shut his eyes, struggling to keep his composure. "We'll act now," he said firmly. "This man will stop." That night, while Claire finally fell asleep, Nick remained awake, staring at the ceiling. His mind spun relentlessly, contemplating one dangerous decision. If the legal path wasn't working, maybe it was time to take a different route. One that existed outside the contracts, outside the agency, outside the rules, but still inside the only thing that mattered, saving their baby. Nick spent that night wide awake, like many before, but this time was different. For the first time, he admitted to himself that the legal system wasn't enough. There were rules, yes, but there were also limits. And once those were crossed, a different kind of action was required. The mere thought of losing that baby after everything Claire had endured was unbearable. He knew he needed to act, and fast. The next morning, while Claire went out early for a checkup with the obstetrician, Nick made a phone call he had rehearsed in his mind for days. "It's about that favor we discussed," he said, voice steady. "I need it to happen now." On the other end of the line, the response was short and direct. "Understood. I'll take care of it." Nick hung up, took a deep breath, and stood still for a few minutes, staring at the kitchen table. He knew he was stepping into a gray zone, but protecting his wife, Shelby, and especially the baby, was worth any moral dilemma. Meanwhile, at the clinic, Shelby was undergoing another exam. Under the doctor's watchful eye, "Your blood pressure stabilized a little today," Dr. Henderson said, "but you must stay calm in the coming days. Any new stress could destabilize things again." Claire sat next to Shelby during the appointment. "We're here for you," she assured her, "no matter what happens." Shelby smiled, but her eyes still carried the weight of anxiety. "I know. I just hope he stops before it's too late." 2 days later, something unexpected happened. Shelby received another message from Blake, but this time, the tone had shifted. "Can we talk? I don't want any more problems." Confused, she replied cautiously, "Talk about what?" "I want to end this. I just need to speak with you in person." One last time, the fear returned, twisting in her stomach. She didn't know if it was a trap, but something felt different. Not knowing what else to do, Shelby called Claire. "He wants to meet now. He said he just wants to talk and end everything, but I don't trust him." Claire thought quickly. "Tell me where I'll go with you. He won't try anything if we're both there." Shelby hesitated but eventually agreed. "All right." Hours later, at a small cafe outside of town, Shelby and Claire arrived together. Blake was already there, sitting in a back corner, wearing a baseball cap and flashing his usual smug grin. As the two women approached, Blake raised his hands as if to show he was harmless. "I'm not here for any trouble." Claire stared him down, then talked. Quickly, Blake looked directly at Shelby. "I've thought it over. I'm not going to push this any further. I don't want the money anymore." The two women exchanged suspicious glances. "And why the sudden change of heart?" Claire asked, arms crossed. Blake shrugged. "Let's just say someone convinced me it would be smarter to disappear before things got too complicated." Shelby narrowed her eyes. "Who spoke to you?" Blake smiled. "Let's just say I had a very persuasive visitor." Claire kept her gaze steady, her heart racing. "Are you threatening someone now, Blake?" "No, actually, quite the opposite. I got a warning, a very clear one, someone who explained what would happen if I kept pushing." He leaned forward. "You don't need to know who it was, but trust me, you won't hear from me again." He stood up slowly, dropped some bills on the table to cover his coffee, and said, "Good luck with the baby. You deserve this. I've caused enough trouble already." And with that, he left, leaving the two women stunned. In the car, heading back to town, Shelby was still trembling. "Claire, what just happened?" "I don't know," Claire answered, though her mind was racing. "I have no idea who got to him. But inside her, an uncomfortable suspicion was growing. Later that night, unable to hold in her unease any longer, Claire approached Nick, who was reading on the couch. "Nick, can we talk?" He closed the book and looked at her, attentively of course. "What is it?" "We met with Blake today. He said someone visited him. Someone convinced him to stop everything." Nick kept a calm expression, but his eyes flickered for a moment. "And who do you think it was, Nick? It doesn't make sense. He just suddenly gives up. After months of pressure." Claire stared at him. "Was it you?" For a moment, silence filled the room. Nick sighed, leaning forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "I couldn't stand by any longer, Claire. Watching you suffer, watching Shelby fall apart, risking the baby." Claire's eyes widened. "What did you do?" "I asked someone for help, an old client of mine. Nothing illegal, just ... A very firm conversation, enough to make him understand that, if he crossed the line, he would ruin himself." Claire ran her hands down her face, shocked. "Nick ... I couldn't trust the system anymore. I had to protect you. Protect our son. For a few seconds, she sat silently, processing everything. Then, with a trembling voice, she asked, "What if this comes back to haunt us?" Nick stood and gently cupped her face. "It won't." He got the message. And finally, "Claire, we can focus on what matters. The baby." In the following days, peace finally settled over everyone for the first time in months. Shelby regained her calm, her blood pressure stabilized, and the weeks progressed smoothly. But even in that apparent calm, Claire couldn't help but wonder how many secrets had to be buried so that this baby could be born in peace. The silence that followed Blake's disappearance was almost surreal for everyone involved. For weeks, there were no more calls, messages, threats, or any sign of movement from him. It finally seemed that after months of escalating tension, worst was behind them. But for Claire, the silence also carried weight, an odd emptiness, unsettling in its own way. She knew that calm didn't always mean peace. Often it was just the pause between one storm and the next. Shelby, on the other hand, finally seemed able to breathe a little easier. Lily's sleeping through the night again. She shared one afternoon with Claire during a new ultrasound. "And so am I," the doctor confirmed the good news. "Her blood pressure is stabilized. All tests are normal. The baby is growing perfectly. We're entering the most delicate phase before delivery, but you can be optimistic." Claire smiled, though some anxiety still lingered beneath the surface. "We're almost there," she said emotionally. "Just a few more weeks and we'll finally meet our baby." At home, Nick tried not to show it, but the episode with Blake still echoed in his mind. He knew he had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, and while his intervention had worked, he also carried the weight of knowing he was now walking a fine line. Even if Blake had vanished, Nick knew he was unpredictable. Nick had already instructed his contact to discreetly monitor any suspicious activity from Blake. He needed to be sure the man would truly stay out of their lives. The weeks moved forward. The 8th month arrived. The nursery was complete, the crib assembled, the stroller parked in the living room waiting for the big day. Everything finally seemed to be falling into place. One Saturday night, Claire and Nick lay in bed, quietly admiring the nursery. "Have you chosen a name yet?" Nick asked, smiling. "I'm still between two, but I think I'm falling in love with Ethan," Claire replied. Nick smiled. "Ethan Callahan. Sounds perfect." Claire turned to him, hugging him. "Nick, thank you." "For what?" "For everything. For holding us together. For protecting me." Nick stayed silent. For a moment, he knew her words carried more weight than she even realized. He didn't answer. He simply held her tighter. But the calm was about to be shattered once again. The following Monday morning, Claire received an unexpected call from Mrs. Miller at the agency. "Good morning, Claire. We need you and Nick to come into the office. Today, a delicate situation has come up." Claire's heart immediately raced. "What happened?" "I'd rather explain in person. It's better." Claire hung up and immediately called Nick. At the agency. Upon their arrival, they found Mrs. Miller waiting with a serious expression. Shelby was already sitting in the waiting room, visibly shaken. "Mrs. Miller, what's going on?" Nick asked directly. The coordinator took a deep breath. "We've received a formal inquiry from a journalist. He contacted the agency requesting information about your surrogacy contract." Claire turned pale. "What? Who is this journalist?" "We don't know exactly how he found out. He wouldn't reveal his source. He simply stated that he received anonymous information indicating that Shelby was involved in a confidential contract, and that there had been a recent extortion attempt during the pregnancy." Claire's blood ran cold. Nick clenched his fists. "This can't be happening." Again, Shelby, her voice trembling, finally spoke. "Claire, Nick, I don't know if it was Blake, but I'm sure it was him. He disappeared." "Shelby," Nick said, frustrated. "I know, but maybe he didn't disappear completely. Maybe he sold the information, or used someone else to leak what he knew." Claire shook her head, already feeling sick. "And the journalist?" she asked. "He hasn't published anything yet," Mrs. Miller replied, "but he's pressuring us for answers. It's clear he's looking for a sensational story. He's not with a major outlet, it's a small local investigative blog, but the risk is that the story gains traction." Nick took a deep breath. "This could explode." "It could," the coordinator confirmed. "And the biggest risk now isn't the contract itself. It's the stress all of this may cause Shelby, especially so close to delivery." Claire felt the crushing weight return to her chest. After the meeting, the couple sat in silence inside their car. Nick drove with his eyes fixed on the road. "This will never end, will it?" Claire whispered. Nick didn't respond immediately. "He's trying to destroy us another way now. Since he couldn't get the money, he wants revenge." Claire sighed. And what do we do now? Nick gripped the steering wheel tighter. Now, we fight. But this time, we won't wait for the problem to knock on our door. He glanced at Claire with determination. If they want war, they'll get war. But on our terms. Claire nodded, feeling for the first time in a long while a flicker of confidence returning amid the chaos, but deep inside, she knew they were now entering the most dangerous phase of all. The baby was almost here, and any wrong move now could cost them everything. The days that followed were like walking through a minefield. Every hour without a publication brought a bit of relief, but Nick and Claire knew the silence could just be the calm before the storm. The agency reinforced its confidentiality protocols. The legal team remained on high alert, ready to act the moment any article went public. Shelby tried to stay calm, but the anxiety slowly ate away at her emotional balance again. The constant fear of seeing her story exposed in a public scandal was torture. What if people find out? Claire, what if they talk about my daughter? Shelby vented during another appointment. We won't let that happen, Claire answered firmly, squeezing Shelby's hand. But even Claire struggled to believe her own words in that moment. Then on Friday morning the worst happened. While having breakfast in the kitchen, Nick received a notification on his phone. It was a message from one of the attorneys. It's out. Immediately, he clicked the link. A small investigative blog from the region displayed the headline, Surrogacy, Blackmail, and Secrets, the hidden $1 million pregnancy in Hartford. Nick's hands trembled as he read the first lines. The journalists had published a full article filled with insinuations, anonymous reports, and alleged sources describing a secret surrogacy contract involving a wealthy couple and a young mother, who had been pressured by an ex-boyfriend to pay a large sum of money. No names were mentioned directly, but the details were enough for anyone close to them to piece it all together. Claire entered the kitchen seconds later and saw Nick's face. It's out, isn't it? Nick simply nodded, showing her the screen. Claire's legs nearly gave out. Oh my God. Minutes later, Mrs. Miller called. I'm with the legal team now. The blog didn't directly violate any confidentiality clause, but left the door wide open for speculation. We can't stop the story from spreading, but we'll act to contain as much as possible. Will this affect Shelby? Claire asked, her voice trembling. Yes, unfortunately, yes. There are already online forums trying to uncover who she is. At the same time, Shelby's phone exploded with dozens of messages. Some friends asked questions masked as concern. Others subtly insinuated what they had read. Panic consumed her. Claire. I don't know what to do, she said, desperate over the phone. Stay calm, Shelby. Don't answer anyone. Don't respond. The agency and the attorneys will handle everything. But the damage was already done. The emotional support that confidentiality had provided Shelby all these months was shattered. The public exposure began to eat away at her stability. The medical team was notified immediately. Shelby's elevated stress levels could trigger labor. She was hospitalized for close monitoring. Nick and Claire went to the hospital the same day. In the hospital room, Shelby tried to hold back tears. I feel like everything's falling apart, Claire. I'm scared. Scared for the baby, for my daughter, scared of everything. Claire firmly held her hands. We're here. We won't let anything happen to you. The doctor entered right after. Her blood pressure has gone up. We need to stay calm. We're not in critical territory yet, but we can't let it escalate further. Nick asked, is there a real risk of premature birth? Yes, the doctor replied frankly. Any new emotional spike could trigger labor. That same day, the agency's legal and PR teams launched an aggressive response. They sent cease and desist letters accusing the blog of defamation, breach of privacy, and using protected information. But the internet damage had already been done. The posts were being shared on local social networks, online forums, and even picked up by minor gossip sites. Though the case hadn't exploded nationally, the pressure within the small community was overwhelming. Meanwhile, Nick made a radical decision. I'm going to meet the journalist, he told Claire that night. What, Nick? That could be dangerous. Not more than what we're already dealing with. This man has no idea who he's messing with. He needs to understand what this could cost him. Claire hesitated, but didn't try to stop him. The next day, Nick managed to schedule a meeting with the journalist, a man named Jared Monroe. They met at a small cafe far from town, away from curious eyes. Mr. Callahan, Jared started, sounding smug. I figured we'd meet eventually. Listen carefully, Nick said firmly. You're not messing with celebrities. You're playing with real people's lives. You're putting my child's life at risk. I only published what was brought to me, Jared replied, cynically. The sources were reliable. I didn't Name anyone, I didn't break the law. Yet, Nick cut in. But you know where this can go. I have a complete legal dossier ready to sue you, your blog, and any of your financial backers. Jared frowned. Is this an intimidation attempt? Nick leaned in. No, this is a warning. You still have time to pull the article, issue a retraction, and step away from this story. If not, I guarantee your career in this business will be shlived. For a few seconds, Jared kept his composure, but his tension was visible. Knew he had struck a nerve. Think carefully, Monroe. You have no idea who really stirred this whole situation, but I do. And trust me, there are people involved far worse than me. The journalist remained silent. It's your choice, Nick concluded as he stood up and left. 2 days later, Jared Monroe quietly published a clarification note on his blog, stating that the information received could not be fully verified and that he would temporarily suspend any further investigation on the case. The original article was deleted hours later. At the hospital, Shelby received the news with immense relief. He took it down. He did, Claire confirmed. And with that, things are starting to calm again. The doctor smiled. Shelby's pressure is stabilizing again. If we keep it this way, we can safely make it to delivery. Shelby, tears in her eyes, whispered, "Thank you for everything." Claire squeezed her hand. "Now let's focus on what really matters. Your baby is almost here, and no one will take that away from us." But even with that sense of relief, deep down, Claire knew one final turn in this story still lay ahead. The silence that followed the article's removal was, this time, far more genuine. No new posts, no anonymous messages, no moves from Blake or anyone else. The legal team kept monitoring everything as a precaution, but as the weeks passed, it finally felt like they were truly heading toward the happy ending they had fought so hard for. Still, Claire couldn't fully relax. Her instinct to protect remained sharp, not out of fear of new threats, but because she knew the greatest challenge was now the birth itself. The 9th month arrived, bringing both relief and growing anticipation. Shelby was strong. The baby, healthy. The medical team was optimistic. In recent days, Claire and Shelby had grown even closer, building a bond that far surpassed any contract. "I never imagined it would be this hard, Claire," Shelby admitted during one of the final appointments. "Neither of us did," Claire replied with a warm smile. "But look how far we've come. What matters now is that very soon, this baby will be in our arms." Shelby took a deep breath. "I just want everything to turn out well. I want to be able to look back and say it was worth it." "It will be," Claire said with conviction. At home, Nick stayed focused on the practical details. "Is the hospital bag ready?" he asked one night, checking the list once again. "Nick," Claire smiled, "you've already checked that list 5 times. I just want to make sure nothing goes wrong," he answered sincerely. Claire came closer and hugged him. "I want that too. But now it's out of our hands. Nature will take over from here." Nick said nothing, simply pulling her into a tighter embrace. The following week, the phone rang at 4:17 a.m. It was Shelby. Her voice was steady but filled with nerves. "Claire, I think it's starting." Claire's heart jumped. "Contractions. They've been regular for almost an hour. I already called the doctor. She told me to head to the hospital." Claire woke Nick immediately. "It's happening." Minutes later, they were all on their way to the hospital. Inside the car, the silence was thick with tension and anticipation. Shelby tried to control her breathing through each contraction. Claire held her hand tightly in the back seat, while Nick kept his eyes locked on the road. "Everything's going to be fine, Shelby," Claire said, trying to project calm. Shelby nodded, squeezing her hand. "I know. I'm just scared. Of the birth, of everything. I'm here," Claire assured her, "and I'll stay with you until the very end." At the hospital, everything was swiftly prepared. The medical team, fully aware of Shelby's history, worked with focus and care. "We're monitoring everything," the obstetrician said calmly. "The baby is doing very well so far." Nick and Claire stayed at Shelby's side throughout the entire labor. The hours that followed were exhausting. The contractions intensified. The pain increased. Fatigue began to take its toll, but Shelby remained strong. With every new wave of pain, Claire gripped her hand tighter, whispering words of encouragement. "You're doing amazing. We're almost there." Between contractions, Shelby locked eyes with Claire, a mixture of fear and determination in her gaze. "He deserves this, Claire, after everything, and he will have it, because of you." After 12 intense hours, the moment finally arrived. The team gathered. The doctor gave the final instructions, and the delivery began. "Push, Shelby, push. He's almost here." Nick held Claire's arm, both completely overwhelmed by emotion. Shelby summoned every bit of strength she had left and, with one final effort, felt the release, and then the unmistakable sound of a newborn's cry filled the room. "It's a boy," the doctor announced with a smile. Tears streamed down Claire and Nick's faces. "Ethan," Claire whispered, her voice breaking. Nick embraced her tightly, both crying tears of relief, joy, and exhaustion, lying on the bed. Shelby gazed at the baby with a look of peace. The doctor brought the baby to Claire. "Would you like to hold him?" Claire extended her arms, receiving baby Ethan for the first time. For a moment, the entire world seemed to stop. All they had been through, the losses, the fears, the heartaches, were left behind in that instant. In that strong cry, there was life. There was hope. That Nick placed his hand on Claire's shoulder, his eyes wet. "Our son, Claire, our son." She smiled, overcome with emotion. "Our miracle." After a few minutes, Claire walked over to Shelby, cradling the baby. "He's perfect," she said, smiling through tears. "And all of this was only possible because of you." Shelby looked at the baby with immense tenderness. Silent tears streamed down her face. "He's yours. He always was." Claire knelt down and gently embraced Shelby. "You were so much more than a surrogate. You were our strength when everything seemed impossible." Shelby smiled softly. "Thank you for trusting me." Later, with everything stabilized, Nick and Claire remained in the hospital room, watching Ethan sleep peacefully in his bassinet. "Nick," Claire whispered calmly. "Yes, now I can finally breathe." Nick smiled. "Now you can, my love. Now you can." But even in that peaceful moment, they both knew one final chapter remained to close this story for good. The first few weeks after Ethan's birth were filled with complete devotion. Nick and Claire took turns during sleepless nights, adjusting to the exhausting routine, but even in their fatigue, a new light shone in both of their eyes. It was as if the enormous weight of the previous months was finally being dissolved by the presence of that tiny little life. But there was still something lingering, something Claire felt, even without saying it aloud. The agency continued wrapping up the final paperwork, especially the formal closure of the agreement with Shelby. During one of their last meetings, Claire insisted on seeing Shelby personally. "How's Lily doing?" Claire asked with a smile. "Happy and curious about her borrowed little brother, as she calls him," Shelby replied, her eyes gleaming. Both women smiled. "I'll never be able to thank you enough, Shelby." Shelby gently squeezed Claire's hand. "You deserved this family, and I found my own peace through this." Meanwhile, Nick received a phone call from his contact, the same one who had spoken to Blake months earlier. "We need to talk, Nick." Nick felt his stomach tighten. Something happened. "Yes, he's back." That same day, Nick met with the investigator at their usual discreet meeting spot, a private investigator Nick had hired off the record ever since Blake reappeared. "Explain," Nick requested. "Blake's trying to sell the story to a larger media outlet outside the region. He stayed quiet publicly because he feared the fallout from his earlier actions. But now, with the baby born and the contract officially closed, he thinks he can profit by revealing everything." Nick ran his hands over his face, taking a deep breath. "He'll never stop, will he? Not while he thinks there's still money to be made from this story." Nick paused for several seconds. "And your suggestion?" The investigator was direct. "We can offer him a final deal, not legal, a real deal, or we make sure this ends permanently." Nick stared at him, feeling the moral weight pressing. Once again, in the days that followed, while they prepared for the meeting, Nick and Claire barely rested. Their conversations were no longer about if they would act, but about the emotional price of every choice. "I keep wondering where we lost control of all this," Claire confessed one night. "Maybe when we said yes to surrogacy," Nick replied honestly. Claire shook her head. "No, when we said yes to desperation, when we accepted doing whatever it took, and now ... here we are." She looked at him, tears gently falling. "But Nick ... the truth is, I would do it all over again. For our family, for our son." Nick held her hands tightly, also emotional. "Me too, and I'll do whatever it takes until the very end." Finally, the meeting was arranged. Nick and the investigator sat across from Blake once more. They chose a discreet hotel, away from curious eyes. Blake entered with the same smug grin, but tension showed on his face. "So, we meet again," he said sarcastically. Nick got straight to the point. "This ends today, Blake." Blake shrugged. "Depends on what you're offering." The investigator placed an envelope on the table. "Here's $20,000 in cash, but with one condition. You disappear. You never contact Shelby, Claire, or anyone connected to us again. Not now. Not 10 years from now. Blake raised an eyebrow. 20 grand. That's it. Nick stared him down. That's it. And your last chance to walk away intact. For a few moments, Blake was silent, staring at the envelope like a predator sniffing bait. You're lucky I'm smarter than I look, he said with a cynical smirk. I know when to back off. He took the envelope and stood up. But don't fool yourselves. Everyone has a price. Yours was high. Mine has now been paid, and he walked out, the door clicking shut behind him. That same day, Nick returned home. Claire was waiting anxiously in the living room. Is it over? She asked quietly. Nick nodded. It's over. Claire broke down in tears, hugging him tightly. Now, we can finally live in peace. Nick kissed her forehead, and for the first time in months, smiled sincerely. Now we can. 3 years had passed since that final chapter in their lives. The story that once seemed like an endless maze was now just a distant memory, still present in their minds, but no longer heavy. It was an autumn morning in Hartford. The sidewalks were covered in orange leaves as Claire pushed Ethan's stroller, now a bright, curious little boy with brown hair and sparkling eyes. Nick walked beside them, carrying a small backpack full of toys. Daddy, look at the bird, Ethan exclaimed, pointing to the sky. Nick smiled. He's saying good morning to you, buddy. Claire looked at them with peaceful joy. Their routine was now simple, quiet. Finally, on the other side of the park, Shelby sat on a bench, watching her daughter Lily play in the sand. When she saw Claire approaching, she smiled wide. Look who's here, Lily. The little girl ran toward Ethan, the two of them hugging naturally, as if they had always been siblings. Nick and Claire sat beside Shelby. How are you? Claire asked. Good, really good, Shelby replied. I finished my nursing degree last month, already landed a steady job at the hospital. Claire squeezed her hand. Shelby, that's wonderful. Shelby nodded, emotional. You know, after everything we went through, it's strange to live without that constant tension. Sometimes I still wake up in the middle of the night expecting some message ... but it passes quickly, Nick added. We all carry some of that weight, but it no longer controls us. Shelby looked at Ethan playing with Lily and smiled softly. Seeing them together always moves me. Even knowing he's your son, I still feel a special connection to him. Claire held back tears. And you always will. You didn't just bring our son into this world, you gave us a life we thought was impossible. Nick added, you were part of our family when we needed it most. And you always will be. The past, with all its conflicts and threats, had finally become a private story between them. No other news reports surfaced. No new blackmail attempts. The promise made in that final deal had been honored. Blake had vanished for good. No sign, no return. As if he finally understood that crossing that line again would cost him too much. That night, back at home, Nick and Claire tucked Ethan into bed. The little boy, half asleep, held his mother's finger tightly. Mummy, can you tell me how I got here again? He asked in a sleepy voice. Claire looked at Nick, and they both smiled. Of course, my love. She sat at the edge of the bed and began the story that, over time, had become their bedtime ritual. Once, Mummy and Daddy dreamed of having a baby, but the path was very hard. We tried many ways. We cried, we struggled, but we never gave up. Then someone very special came to help us. She carried you in her belly with great care until the day you were born, strong and healthy. Ethan yawned. And I'm your special gift. You're the greatest gift of all, Claire whispered, kissing his forehead. Nick gently stroked his son's hair. Now it's time to sleep, little champ. After Ethan drifted off, Nick and Claire sat together on the porch. As they often did on quiet nights, for several minutes, they simply sat in silence, looking at the starry sky. Then Claire spoke, her voice filled with emotion. You know, sometimes I wonder if everything we went through was meant to test us. Maybe it was meant to transform us, Nick replied. We crossed every line, Claire. Ethical, emotional, financial. But we survived, and we won. Claire nodded. And the most beautiful part is that even in the hardest choices, we always stood together. We were never perfect, but we were a team, Nick smiled. And now we have the purest result of that sleeping inside. Claire rested her head on his shoulder. Now I can finally breathe. Nick wrapped his arm around her, holding her close. Now you can, love, now you can. And so, the most turbulent chapter of their lives was finally behind them. What remained was the essential love, resilience, a rebuilt family, and a little boy who, one day, would know the full truth not as a stain, but as proof that his parents crossed the impossible to hold him in their arms. Because some stories aren't perfect, but they are, without a doubt, extraordinary. If you enjoyed today's story, leave your like and share your own story in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any future stories.